It's January 1st, 2024. Start of 21 days of prayer. Our theme this year is to lean in, and that's what I want to challenge you to do, to lean in to hear God's voice, lean in to His presence. It's going to be a great journey. We're so glad you're here with us. So, Matthew, we talk about 21 days of prayer. It's not 1 day or 10 days or 15 days or 40 days. Some people are like crazy prayer and fasting for 60 days.
Yeah.
But we do 21 days of prayer, something we've done for the last 3 or 4 years. You want to give people a little insight into that magic number 21?
Well, it's not magic, but I think a good question is why 21? Why not 41 or 31 or 1 even for that matter? But the reason that we're doing 21 days is because it takes 21 days to form and build a habit. At least that's what science kind of teaches us about our brains, is it helps us understand that it takes about 3 weeks, about 21 days to build a habit. And we want prayer to be a habit, a spiritual habit, something that's not just something we do once or twice. It's not just something we do, we need something, but something that is an everyday part of our lives. It's a routine. It's something that we're desperate for God. We need Him, and it's something that happens every day. And so we thought, hey, why don't we start with 21 days to build that habit, 21 days to kind of put that in our minds. If we've kind of gotten busy over this, past holiday season, and maybe lost track of what's really important, it's like, all right, let's rebuild this habit, reform it, kind of make it more of a routine. And so that's why 21 days. It's not a magic number, but it is good to kind of think, let's make this important and make it something that we're doing in order to build this habit.
Yeah. So admittedly, on day one, it's exciting, right? Anytime you start something new, it's incredibly exciting. But I want to talk on day 21. Yeah. I want to talk on day 21 to give you some encouragement for day 19 and day 20 and 21. Let's talk about it on day one. And it's this idea. I posted a question on my Instagram recently about just asking people, what's your beef with prayer? Right? What problems do you have with it? Why do you not pray? Why do you find it difficult to pray? And one of the top responses that I got...
Wait. People actually responded to their pastor and told them they had a beef with prayer and that they didn't actually pray all the time.
Yeah, there are quite a bit of sinners that go to Revo Church, and I love that. Here was one of the frequently asked responses that they gave. It was, what do you do when you pray, but it seems like God doesn't answer? I don't want to do anything that doesn't work, and I pray once, I pray twice, I ask, I feel like it's a good request, but God doesn't give it to me, or God doesn't answer. And so you're going to get to the point maybe in 19, 20, maybe for some of you it's going to be day 12, day 13, where you're like, well, wait a minute now, I've been praying and asking God for things, and there's no movement. Nothing's happening. Nothing's going on. And I find it really interesting that Jesus actually predicted that we would be in this situation. Multiple times in Jesus's ministry, where He was teaching and preaching, sharing parables, in the book of Luke specifically, He addresses the questions that people online are saying, well, is it going to be answered? Will it be answered immediately? Will I get what I want every time? And I think Jesus knew our propensity would be, we're going to view God as this cosmic vending machine where we can just close our eyes, bow our heads, fold our hands, and you hit the buttons, and then out drops whatever you ask and pray for. But Jesus specifically, there's 2 stories. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Luke 11 is a parable that Jesus tells of the friend that knocked on his neighbor's house and asking for bread. It was the middle of the night.
Right.
And, he's just constantly knocking, hey, I've got family in town. Hey, I need something.
How annoying is that?
Exactly. You don't want to be that neighbor. But the Bible says in verse 8, he says, essentially, after knocking and his persistence, the neighbor essentially just got up in the middle of the night and said, yo, I don't want to do this. All of my family's in the bed. I'm tired. I've had a long day. But just because you kept knocking, I am going to open up my door and hand you this bread. And so what Jesus is saying is, hey, man, there's a power in the persistence of prayer. Another one was the parable of the persistent widow.
Right, that's Luke 18.
Yeah, right.
I like that one because the thing that gets me about the parable of persistent widow is that it almost compares God to an unjust judge. It's almost like, wait, Jesus, are you saying that God is someone who's unjust, that He's a judge who doesn't care? But actually what Jesus is trying to show us in that parable is that Look, even someone who is unjust, someone who doesn't care about widows, someone who's just an evil man will eventually give this widow what she's asking for. And so how much more then will a loving God give you what you're asking for? How much more is he willing to respond and hear the prayers if we who are evil, are able to just be, all right, you're annoying me, be quiet, here's what you're asking for. He says, well, how much more then will God, who is not evil, but who's perfectly good and perfectly kind, perfectly gracious, how much more then will he respond in a way that is favorable, in a way that hears the prayers and answers them? And so, both of those are just two great parables, especially starting out asking that question, why 21? Why not just one day of prayer?
Yep. So I want to give you 3 kind of takeaways to start the 21 days of prayer. And maybe somewhere in the process, you have to rewind and come back to day 1 to be reminded of these truths that Jesus shares. But I think the first thing that Jesus admits, and he helps us see it's 2 different times, is the fact that the answers to your prayers do not always come immediately. He says there's going to be persistence. He says to continue to knock. He named the widow the persistent widow. Right. It wasn't the poor widow or the whatever fill-in-the-blank widow. He says that the idea is this woman was persistent. And so Jesus even looks at his followers and says, hey, the word that I want to mark you by your prayers is the persistence, which he's inferring. If you have to pray it more than once and be persistent, it's because God hasn't answered it yet.
Right.
So just kind of take some heart in the fact that all of your prayers don't get answered immediately. Jesus knew that, and he wants to do something in your life and through your life, even through the process of you waiting and being persistent in that. I think another thing that comes to mind is I think Jesus knew our propensity towards frustration when we don't get what we want, when we want it, and how we want it. And so Jesus begins to build this, as you said, this negative illustration that if we don't watch out, frustration leads to disappointment. And this is going to happen over the 21 days. It's already happened to you. There's a reason why you were praying prayers in the past and you stopped praying them, because frustration led to disappointment, and then disappointment leads to discouragement, and discouragement eventually leads to the point where you just don't pray anymore. God doesn't care. God's not listening. He's not going to answer. What's the use in doing it if I've been knocking and knocking and knocking and no one has come to the door yet? And so Jesus is like, hey, be aware that you and I have a tendency to be impatient, and we get frustrated very easily if things don't operate on our timeline.
Yeah. What I love about that second thing is thinking that Jesus, he knows this because he's God. And so he's omniscient. He knows everything. So he factually knows this, but also because he became human and took on human flesh in the incarnation, he knows it experientially. That's what I think is so cool about Jesus knowing this, is that he knows what it's like to be tempted to be impatient, knows what it's like to be tempted to be frustrated and to give up. Hebrews tells us that he was tempted in every way we are, yet without sin. And so this is something when he's looking at his disciples and teaching us through his word today, he really knows what it's like to feel that sting and to feel that, gosh, I want to give up. And so we can look to him to be that example for us of keep pushing, keep being persistent. How patient has he been with us in the way that we follow him? And so likewise, we can be patient when asking and persevering in our prayer life as well. I love that second point. Jesus knows what that's like and helps us to be persistent in our prayers.
So here's the key. I'm going to give you the keys to getting more of your prayers answered. Is that like clickbait enough for you? Anybody interested? Anybody interested in this?
They stopped listening when I talk, but when you said that, they were like, "Ooh, volume up."
Let me write this down. If your persistence outlasts your disappointment, and you persist in prayer, then you'll get more of your prayers answered. I believe that more of our prayers aren't answered because we stopped praying before God was done teaching us what we needed to know. Waiting is a part of the process. It's not a waste. It's not like God off doing something else and he's asleep at the wheel and he's like, oh, wait, shoot, you're praying. I guess I need to do something about it now. It's not a reminder. Oftentimes God tests us and what we care about and the persistence in our prayers. So there's the key right there. That's the application that I want to leave with you today. If you will simply pray again, start to pray again. Those prayers that you gave up on, those prayers that you prayed months ago and you didn't get an answer and it wasn't working like you thought it was, start to pray again. I want to challenge you to do that, because if your persistence outlasts your frustration, then I believe over the next 21 days, you'll see more answers to the prayers that you're voicing to God. It's going to be a journey. I'm looking forward to it. Would you lean in with us and see what God wants to do?